Billionaire mocks Waitress in German, freezes. When she fires back fluently, the title promised a clash of dignity and arrogance, and it begins inside a small Phoenix café, where the late afternoon sun paints every corner gold. Plates clink, coffee brews, and the tired hum of conversation fills the room. Behind the counter, Sophie Turner moves quickly, balancing trays, pouring refills, masking exhaustion with a practiced smile. The door swings open. Richard Caldwell strides in, his tailored suit out of place against the cafe's modest charm. Edward Marshall, older and refined, follows close behind. Richard's presence shifts the air. Voices drop, eyes glance up. He surveys the room with faint disgust before sliding into a booth, snapping his fingers for service. Sophie approaches, pen ready. Richard orders briskly, dismissing her with a wave before launching into conversation. His words carry weight, but not warmth. Complaints about the mediocre atmosphere, impatience at the pace, remarks meant to sting. Edward sits uncomfortably, glancing at Sophie as if to apologize with his eyes. Then Richard leans forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound secretive. In smooth, confident German, he mocks the waitress who stands before him, assuming her ignorance makes her deaf to his words. Sophie's breath stills. Her eyes flicker, just for a second, but her expression remains calm. Inside, every syllable burns. She collects the empty notepad, turns away, and thinks quietly. Not now, but soon. The audience knows a storm is coming. Sophie Turner was not always a waitress. There was a time when she carried notebooks filled with German literature, when she sat in crowded lecture halls at Humboldt University in Berlin, scribbling notes as her professors spoke about Goethe, Kafka, and Brecht. She loved language for its ability to connect worlds. Every new word unlocked a door, and every sentence she mastered in German felt like a triumph. She had a circle of friends, a small apartment lined with second-hand books, and dreams of becoming a translator who could bridge cultures with words. Those days felt distant now. They had ended abruptly when an email from Arizona arrived. Her younger brother David was sick, too sick to manage alone. He needed someone who would fight insurance claims, juggle hospital visits, and stay by his side during the nights when fear was heavier than medicine. Sophie did not hesitate. She closed her Berlin apartment, packed 2 suitcases, and returned home. Back in Phoenix, the city did not greet her with scholarly debates or late-night philosophy cafes. Instead, it offered double shifts at a modest neighborhood diner. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and fried eggs, its walls carrying the chatter of college students and retirees. It was not glamorous, but it was steady, and steady meant David's prescriptions could be filled. Sophie worked tirelessly. She was always the first to arrive, and often the last to leave. Carlos, the cook, watched her with quiet admiration. He once told her, "You carry yourself like someone who could be anywhere, yet you choose to be here." She only smiled, unwilling to explain that she had not chosen at all. The regular customers saw her grace even when she was rushing between tables. She remembered everyone's orders, greeted them with warmth, and never allowed fatigue to bleed into her service. A man who came in every Friday morning once told her, "You make this place feel like home." Sophie accepted the compliment with a nod, though inside she carried a weight that few could see. What people did not know was that after every shift, she went home to David. His room was stacked with pill bottles, and his smile, though weaker now, remained her anchor. On the nights he could not sleep, Sophie sat beside him, reading passages from German novels. Sometimes he teased her, saying, "You sound like you never left Berlin." She would laugh softly, though her heart ached for the life she had paused indefinitely. Despite the exhaustion, Sophie held fast to her values. She never measured people by their wallets or their clothes. She treated the man in a business suit with the same patience as the teenager who paid with loose change. Respect was her compass, not status, That was why the arrogance of men like Richard Caldwell cut so deeply. They judged in an instant, never pausing to wonder about the unseen battles others carried. One evening, as she wiped down tables after closing, Sophie remembered a line from her Berlin professor, a mentor who had seen promise in her. He once told her, "True strength is in silence, until the moment comes to speak." At the time, she thought it was poetic. Now, in this cafe thousands of miles away, the words returned like a whisper from her past. Silence had become her shield. She listened more than she spoke, observed more than she revealed. Customers often assumed she was just another waitress working for tips, and Sophie allowed them to think so. They never suspected she understood fragments of conversations in Spanish, in French, and especially in German. It was her hidden brilliance, an entire education folded quietly behind her polite smile. The sacrifice of leaving Berlin weighed on her. Yet Sophie never regretted caring for David. Family mattered more than ambition. Still, there were nights she lay awake, wondering if the world would ever see the strength she kept tucked inside. And then Richard Caldwell walked into her cafe. His sharp suit, his louder-than-life voice, his careless comments about everything around him. They were the very embodiment of what she despised. He spoke as if the world was his stage and everyone else was a prop. The moment he chose German to mock her, Sophie felt her professor's words echo louder than ever. Silence had been her strength. But soon, she would need to speak. That thought lingered like an ember, promising that the fire had not yet burned. The hum of the cafe shifted once Richard Caldwell settled into his booth. His voice did not blend. With the quiet chatter around him, it cut through it. He complained about the sunlight streaming through the blinds, about the cheap ceramic cups, about the pace of service. Each remark was sharp enough for nearby customers to hear, and Edward Marshall's uneasy glances showed he wished his companion would lower his tone. Sophie arrived at their table with practiced calm, placing down their drinks without spilling a drop. "Here you are, gentlemen," she said softly. Richard did not thank her. Instead, he smirked and muttered something in German, a phrase he assumed was private. "Ein nutzloses Niemand, nur Kaffee servierend," a useless nobody, just serving coffee. The words stung, but Sophie's face betrayed nothing. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the last cup, yet she pulled it back quickly, steadying herself. She turned away before Richard could see the flicker in her eyes. Inside, however, her chest burned. At a nearby table, two college students glanced up from their laptops. A middle-aged man reading a tablet raised his brow. Whispers floated quietly, as if the cafe itself could sense the imbalance of power playing out in that booth. Some customers pitied Sophie, others admired her composure, but none of them intervened. Richard leaned back in his seat with confidence, swirling his spoon idly through the coffee he had not yet tasted. "Places like this survive because people like me allow them to," he declared in English, ensuring his voice carried across the room. Edward shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the arrogance on display. Then Richard switched back to German, his tone smooth but cutting. He spoke not only of Sophie, but also of the cafe itself, dismissing the establishment as beneath him, a place unworthy of his presence. Between insults, he slid into conversations about company transfers, names, and amounts, business dealings that did not belong in public. He believed the language shielded him, that every syllable was a secret. Sophie heard it all, every careless remark, every number, every name. She did not need to write it down. Her mind captured each word with precision. What might have been dismissed as background chatter became evidence of his arrogance. On the outside, she remained steady, refilling water glasses, wiping a counter, carrying trays. But inside, her storm gathered force. The insult was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or belittled because of the work they did. Richard had mocked her dignity, and by extension, the dignity of every worker who stood behind a counter, wore an apron, or served a meal with a smile. Edward finally leaned forward, his voice low, almost pleading. "Richard," he said, "perhaps we should keep this conversation private." Richard waved him off with a dismissive flick of the wrist. His ego had no brakes. He raised his voice, again laughing softly as he delivered another remark in German. "Arrogance ist ein Luxus, den Sie sich nie leisten können. Arrogance is a luxury she will never afford." Sophie's grip tightened around the tray she carried. She steadied her breathing. Customers' eyes followed her, sensing the silent battle between pride and patience. The café felt heavier, as though the walls themselves absorbed Richard's disdain. Richard, oblivious to the growing tension, leaned back smugly, folding his hands over his chest. He looked entirely certain of his superiority, convinced that his words had vanished into the air unheard. But Sophie's silence was not surrender. It was preparation. She cleared another table with deliberate calm, her eyes flickering briefly, toward Richard. Inside, her professor's words echoed once more. True strength is in silence until the moment comes to speak. The moment had not yet arrived, but it was close. The room held a fragile calm until Richard Caldwell leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. In German, he spoke words that crossed a line he had not crossed before. Ein Mädchen wie sie wird immer im Staub bleiben, unfähig jemals Respekt zu verdienen. A girl like her will always remain in the dust, unable to ever earn respect. The remark cut deeper than any before. Sophie's hands tightened on the coffee pot she was carrying, her knuckles turning white. A silence fell across her chest like a heavy stone. But then, something shifted. The silence did not cage her anymore. It freed her. She placed the pot gently on a nearby table, straightened her apron, and walked toward Richard's booth. Her steps were steady, each one echoing louder in her mind than the clink of cups around her. When she stopped beside him, the café seemed to shrink, every eye fixed on her. In flawless German, Sophie's voice rang out. Vielleicht haben Sie vergessen, dass nicht jeder, der schweigt, unwissend ist. Perhaps you have forgotten that not everyone who is silent is ignorant. The café froze. A fork dropped onto a plate somewhere in the back, the sound slicing the stillness. Richard's smirk collapsed, his face drained of color, and for the first time all afternoon, he had no words. Edward Marshall's jaw fell open. Sophie continued, her tone sharp but calm. You called me a useless nobody. You mocked the way I serve coffee. And you spoke of your dealings as if no one could possibly understand. But I understood every word. A murmur spread through the café. Customers leaned in, whispering to each other, their eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The power in the room shifted, heavy and undeniable. Richard tried to recover, his lips parting as if to deny it, but Sophie did not give him the chance. She translated his insults into English, every cruel phrase laid bare for everyone to hear. He said I was dust. He said people like me will never deserve respect. Her voice did not tremble. It carried weight, the kind of weight that silences arrogance. Richard's hand twitched as he reached for his cup, his fingers betraying a tremor. The confidence he had carried in so effortlessly was slipping away with every word Sophie spoke. Inside, Sophie reminded herself of her brother David, of the sacrifices she had made. This moment was not just about her pride. It was about proving that respect could not be bought with money, spoken in a foreign tongue, or wrapped in business suits. Respect lived in the choices people made, how they treated others when they believed no one was watching. The café felt charged, alive with anticipation. The students at the corner table stared wide-eyed. The older man with the tablet set it down, giving Sophie his full attention. Even Carlos peeked out from the kitchen, his expression proud and tense at the same time. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his arrogance unraveling thread by thread. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward Edward for support, but Edward did not move. The older man simply sat back, stunned, caught in the shockwave of truth Sophie had unleashed. The silence after her words was thick, pressing on everyone. Sophie's gaze held steady, her heart pounding but her posture unbroken. This was not a waitress scolding a customer. This was a woman reclaiming dignity in the face of arrogance. And in that charged pause, the question lingered like an open wound. What would Richard do now? Richard Caldwell let out a forced laugh, sharp and hollow. The sound did not match the unease on his face. He leaned back in the booth, trying to mask his shaken confidence with a smirk. "Well," he said loudly, switching to English this time, "I suppose I should be impressed. Not many waitresses speak fluent German. That is unusual." His tone carried a thin edge of sarcasm, but beneath it hid a scramble for control. The café remained silent, waiting. Sophie stood tall, her hands folded calmly in front of her, apron. Her eyes held his, unblinking. Richard's smirk faltered for a moment before he straightened his tie. Then came the shift. His voice softened, his smile polished like a businessman pitching a deal. "You clearly have talent," he said. "Sharp mind, confidence, languages. You should not be wasting your life carrying plates in a dusty cafe." He paused deliberately, making sure the whole room heard him. "Come work for me. I can offer you a position in my company, executive assistant, perhaps even higher. A generous salary, benefits. You would never have to worry about medical bills again." Gasps rippled across the cafe. Carlos peeked further out from the kitchen, eyebrows raised. Even Edward tilted his head, watching Richard carefully, unsure whether to admire the maneuver or cringe at the desperation. For Richard, this was not kindness. It was a cover, a mask to salvage his pride. If he could spin the moment into an act of recognition, he might leave without looking like the villain who insulted a hard-working waitress. But Sophie did not move. Her calmness filled the space between them. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both gratitude and certainty. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Caldwell," she said steadily, her voice carrying through the cafe. "But I must decline." Richard blinked. The smirk dropped. He leaned forward, his voice tighter. "Decline? Do you realize what I'm offering you? Wealth, security, a chance to rise above this." He gestured at the cafe with a careless sweep of his hand, dismissing the warmth of the place as if it were dirt on his sleeve. Sophie did not flinch. Her reply was quiet but firm. "This cafe may not have marble floors or leather chairs, but it has dignity. Every cup of coffee served here is honest work. Respect does not come with a paycheck or a title. It comes with how you treat people." Murmurs of agreement stirred among the customers. A woman near the window nodded faintly. A young man with headphones pulled them off, listening intently. The cafe had turned into a stage, and every person present was an audience member watching the duel unfold. Richard's jaw tightened. His polished businessman mask cracked, revealing the sharp pride beneath. "Do not be naive," he shot back. "The world does not care about dignity. Money is respect. Power is respect. Without them, you are invisible." Sophie tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "If money is respect, then why are you fighting so hard to keep it right now?" The line hit him like a strike. A few customers chuckled under their breath, quickly covering their mouths. Richard's ears turned red. For a long moment, neither moved. It was a chess match of words, each exchange heavier than the last. Sophie's calmness only made Richard's unease more visible. He straightened suddenly, forcing another smile, as if determined to win. You will regret saying no, he warned. Opportunities like this do not come twice. Sophie shook her head gently. Opportunities built on arrogance are not opportunities. They are traps, and I do not plan to live my life trapped. The café buzzed with energy, the air thick with tension. Every customer leaned in, hearts racing as if they were part of the duel themselves. Richard Caldwell, the billionaire who walked in untouchable, now found himself cornered by nothing more than the truth spoken with quiet strength. And yet the battle was not finished. His pride would not let him walk away so easily. Richard Caldwell's voice sharpened as he leaned across the table, his tone louder than before. You are wasting your life here, Sophie, he pressed, his hand tapping the polished wood. A mind like yours should not be hidden in a place like this. You could be someone important. His words carried the edge of both desperation and command, as if he could still bend her will through force. Sophie stood still, her eyes fixed on him with calm defiance. Around them, the café had gone completely silent. The clinking of silverware had stopped, and the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to fade into the background. Every person in that room was waiting to see how she would answer. She took a breath and placed her hands gently on the back of a chair, steadying herself. Her voice, when it came, was clear and unwavering. You see this café, Mr. Caldwell? You see me carrying plates, wiping tables, pouring coffee? To you, it looks like wasted potential. To me, it looks like survival and sacrifice. Richard blinked, his smirk faltering. Sophie's gaze grew distant for a moment, as if she were speaking not just to him, but to everyone listening. I studied in Berlin. I loved literature, history, languages. I had dreams bigger than this small town. My professors believed in me. I believed in me. But when my brother fell ill, none of that mattered anymore. I packed my bags, left everything behind, and came home. Because family comes before ambition. A hush fell heavier over the café. A woman near the counter bit her lip, her eyes glassy. Sophie pressed on, her voice firm but trembling slightly with raw emotion. I work double shifts because David's treatments are expensive. I wash dishes, I sweep floors, I serve coffee. And every day, I do it with my head high. Because honest work is never shameful. Because dignity is not about where you stand, but how you stand there. Edward Marshall's face shifted, the sternness in his eyes softening. His hands, once folded neatly on the table, loosened as he exhaled slowly. It was clear he was moved, his heart torn between loyalty to his partner and admiration for the woman speaking truth. Richard swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as if trying to resist the weight of her words. But the mask was cracking. The man, who once mocked her in a language he thought she could not understand, now found himself speechless in any language at all. Sophie's voice grew softer, yet somehow stronger. Respect is not measured in money or titles. Respect is shown when no one is watching, when no one is keeping score. It is in kindness. It is in sacrifice. It is in treating people as people, not as stepping stones. A man sitting by the window lowered his coffee cup slowly, nodding, in agreement. A young woman at the corner wiped a tear from her cheek. Even Carlos, standing half-hidden in the kitchen doorway, looked at Sophie with pride in his eyes. Sophie looked straight at Richard, her expression steady. You think I am wasting my life? No, Mr. Caldwell. I am living it. Every hour I spend, here is an hour my brother gets closer to hope. If that makes me invisible in your world, then so be it. I would rather be invisible with dignity than visible with arrogance. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to Edward, searching for help, but Edward only looked back at him with a quiet disappointment. For the first time since he entered the café, Richard Caldwell was stripped of his armor. No wealth, no title, no clever remark could shield him from the truth Sophie had spoken. He sat there, defeated, not by force, but by honesty. And the entire café knew it. The weight of silence lingered in the café long after Sophie's final words. Richard Caldwell sat frozen for a few seconds, the arrogance drained from his face. His eyes flickered to Edward, but no rescue came. Edward only gave a slow, almost sorrowful shake of his head. Without another word, Richard pushed back his chair. The scrape of the legs against the floor echoed louder than his laughter ever had. Edward rose quietly beside him. Together they walked toward the door, the sound of their expensive shoes dull against the tiled floor. Just before stepping out, Richard paused. His hand rested on the doorframe, and for a brief moment, he looked back. His face was pale, pride shattered, eyes shadowed with something he had never expected to feel inside this modest café: defeat. Then he left, and the door swung shut behind him. The tension broke like a snapped string. Customers exchanged glances, relief and admiration in their eyes. A woman near the counter gave Sophie a small smile. The young man with headphones clapped, once, softly, before stopping, unsure if it was allowed. Sophie, however, did not bask in the attention. She adjusted her apron, picked up a cloth, and quietly returned to her work. The victory was never about applause. It was about dignity. As she wiped a table, Carlos leaned out from the kitchen, his face carrying a rare seriousness. He gave her a subtle nod, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Respect. The café slowly returned to life, cups clinking, spoons stirring, quiet conversations rising again. But something had changed. Everyone there had witnessed a truth that could not be unseen. Sophie's thoughts drifted to David. She imagined telling him about this moment later, about how she had faced a man with more money than she could ever dream of, and reminded him, and herself, that true strength had nothing to do with wealth. She paused, the cloth still in her hand, and reflected quietly. Respect is not bought with money, power, or titles. It is earned with actions, with choices, with courage when it matters most. The golden light from the setting sun spilled across the tables, painting everything in a soft glow. Sophie whispered under her breath, in flawless German, words only. She could hear, "Respect ist der wahre Reichtum. Respect is the true wealth." Her lips curved into a small, calm smile. The café doors opened again with the sound of new customers arriving, life moving forward. Sophie greeted them warmly, just as she always had. Steady, humble, unshaken. And for everyone who had witnessed the scene that afternoon, her quiet strength would never be forgotten.